I'm carrying on the Nehemiah series that we have started. And last week we heard about the relationship that Nehemiah had with the king, and kind of where they were at and the expectations and the responsibilities he had in his role as cupbearer. But today I'm going a little bit further. I'm looking at chapter 2. If you're following verse just 1 to 10, I'm just looking at 10 verses. And this whole part of that particular section is about Nehemiah when he physically approaches the king. So he's not thinking about going to the king, he actually goes to the king with all of his requests. And we're going to look at what happens to Nehemiah. But the subjects that I want to look on are faith and boldness. So faith is obviously the theme for today. I love it when God does that. He brings a continuous theme through the whole story. But to begin with, I'm just going to read to you chapter 2, verse 1 to 10, just so everyone is on the same page as to where we're at. I need to put my specs on to see, though. Okay, chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take, and when will you get back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, "If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates so that they will provide for me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and for the city wall and for the residence I will occupy." And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted me my requests. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. When Sanballat and Tobiah officially heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. And that's the section, as I said, it's only 10 verses, so it's not much at all. But all I want to do is I just want to look at the journey that Nehemiah went on, the faith that he had to build, and therefore the boldness that came out. But it doesn't sound like it doesn't necessarily sound like he started well. I mean, he started by approaching the king, sad. And we heard last week the consequences of approaching the king sad. It was punishable by death. So you could imagine maybe the trepidation he was going with, maybe slight fear that he was doing it. But the thing that really struck me about this is how someone can approach someone, even the king, looking so sad to the point where they can't hide their sadness. You know, we all do very well of, even when we're not feeling great, we can hold the face, can't we? We can hold ourselves well enough that even when we might be sad or down, we can hide it well so that no one will notice. But Nehemiah couldn't. Nehemiah couldn't hide his sadness. But why? Why couldn't he hide such a great sadness? And I believe that sadness was a godly burden. He was carrying this godly burden, something that God had placed on him, that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't hide the sadness from his face, because it wasn't just a normal sadness. It wasn't a sadness that thought, "Oh, I've had a bad week." It was a sadness that troubled his heart. And I think when you have a sadness or a godly burden that troubles your heart so much, it doesn't just affect maybe the way that you think. I think it affects your very being. Who you are as a person must be changed because you're carrying something that God has deliberately and purposefully and intentionally dropped onto you. And that's what Nehemiah was carrying. He was carrying something that God gave him, this burden for the people. And then it makes me think, do we ever ask for a godly burden? Because Nehemiah did. Nehemiah took on this burden. But do we ever ask for a godly burden? Do we really want, I know Des has touched on this before, do we really want our heart to break for what breaks God's heart? Do we pray that prayer, God, break my heart for what breaks yours? Or would we rather not? Because actually, to have my heart broken or to carry a godly burden means I have to do something about it. And we're not that interested in doing anything about it. So do we ever pray for that godly burden? And then despite this godly burden, Nehemiah still approaches the king. He knows that he has to fulfill his role despite how he feels. He has to fulfill this role of being cupbearer to the king. And so he does it, and he does it with great sadness. And the king notices, and the king asks him about it. And the first thing that he does is he reassures the king of his loyalty and of his faithfulness. The king asks him why he looks so sad, and he says, "May the king live forever." He's reassuring him, but the king still notices, and I'm really, really quite sure that if you're not meant to be sad in front of the king, I'm pretty sure that you're not meant to tell the king why you're sad or give him or tell him that burden. I don't think that's necessarily normal practice for someone. But yet Nehemiah does it anyway. Nehemiah chooses in great faith and trust to go, okay, I'm just going to share my heart with you. I know that God's placed it on me, so I'm going to share it. And I think it's because Nehemiah knew this. Faith never knows where it is being led, but it loves and knows the one who is leading. I think that's what faith is. Faith never knows where it's going, and Nehemiah knew that he had to approach the king, and he knew he was doing it with this godly burden, but he didn't know where it was going to end up. He didn't know the end result. But what Nehemiah did know is the God that he was following. So he did it anyway. And so he approached the king, and he told the king what his heart was. He told the king what he believed God had put on his heart. And as I said, Nehemiah wouldn't have known the outcome of the choice that he made to trust in God, to put faith in God, to share his heart with the king. I'm sure the book of Nehemiah would have looked very different if he had chosen to stay quiet. I'm not sure the story would have ended the same. But he chose to do it, and he chose to trust God over something he had absolutely no control over. That's a bold faith. A bold faith. A little while ago, there was I think it's still on, but there was a series called Running Wild by Bear Grylls. And it's where he takes different celebrities, most of them A-list celebrities, so they're really quite famous, or even the president of America. He took him, and he takes him out for 2 days into somewhere in the middle of nowhere, just wherever it might be, and he takes them out on a 2-day kind of trip, and they have to get from point A to point B, which is their exit point. They have rations. They have pretty much their backpack with rope, and off they go. That's pretty much it. And it's an excellent program. I'd recommend watching it. But one of the first episodes was with Kate Winslet. I really like her as an actress, but if you watch her episode, I think you might like her a little bit more. Yeah, so it's that one of the last things that she says. She gets to the top, and they're talking about how much she just has to commit to what she's doing and just go for it, because there is no turning back, not when you're climbing a rock face anyway. But it's the thing that she said is, fear is a good thing, running away from it is not. And actually, that just sums it up. I really do think that fear is a good thing, but running from it is not. And I think Nehemiah, when he walked into kind of the room with the king, knowing what he was carrying, knowing probably what he would have to share, I think he walked in with a whole lot of fear. And he even says, once the king asks him why he looks so sad, he says, I was very much afraid. I think Nehemiah walked in with a whole lot of fear. But he walked in with a whole lot of fear, a big, fat God burden, and a sprinkle of faith. And I think it probably was that. I don't think he walked in really insanely bold, ready, faith-filled, going for it, because he was terrified. And so I think he walked in with faith, knowing what he was carrying, and he had just that sprinkle of faith, that dusting of faith. And we often talk about wanting to be fearless. And for me, I think fearlessness is something to be admired. Those that don't have many fears, I admire them, because I'm a scaredy cat sometimes, so I admire fearlessness. But I don't think God's asking me to be fearless. I think he's asking me to feel the fear and do it anyway. And I actually think that's what he asks from most of us, is to feel the fear, but do it anyway. And I think the thing with fear is that it tells us, I think fear is a good thing because it tells us when something is a little bit risky. It tells us when something is a little bit out of our comfort zone, a little bit uncomfortable. That's what fear does. It tells us all of those things. But like Kate Winslet said, fear is a good thing, but running from it is not. And I think God's saying fear's okay. It is okay to be scared. It is okay to be afraid. Just don't run from it. Don't let it control you. Don't let it get hold of you. But feel it. Feel it and let that be like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing. God, I'm approaching the king here as Nehemiah. I'm not quite sure how this is going to go, but I know what you've given me. I know what you said. So here it is. And I'm just going to throw it out there. And that's all that Nehemiah does. He just feels the fear, but speaks anyway. And we have to work out, we have to evaluate whether it is our fears or our faith that dictate what we say and do in our lives, or are we going to choose to live with a godly boldness that expects him to answer our prayers? We can live with faith and fear. We can live with both of them, but which one is going to dictate how you live? Which one is going to be that overriding? Is it going to be your fears that just control you and even hold you back? Or is it going to be your faith that propels you into something new? And I think when we choose to live with that faith, we're choosing to live with a godly boldness that expects him to do something. It expects him to show up. And after Nehemiah shares his heart, the king asks him, what is it that you want? And I'm actually sure when Nehemiah was praying, probably before he went in, he's like, that's the question. That's the one I want. For the king to sit there and go, what can I do for you? After I've just kind of done a whole load of stuff I shouldn't have done, what can I do for you, Nehemiah? And Nehemiah's response is he waited and then prayed to the God of heaven. So the king sits there and goes, what can I do for you? And he prays. Why? Why does Nehemiah pray? This is seize the moment. This is grab it with both hands. That's the question you've been waiting for. And he prays. And the thing that I think as we go through the book of Nehemiah, and as we've already heard, Nehemiah's heart is for God and God only. And so he knows that he needs to pray, because he needs God to tell him what to do. He needs God to tell him what to say. He needs that strength, that wisdom that Des has talked about, that we've sung about all this morning. He needs all of those things to kick in order to move forward in the situation. And it was that song that Luke led. God, I look to you. I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. I think that's probably what Nehemiah prayed. He's like, God, okay, this is it, but don't let me be overwhelmed. Just give me what I need to see and what I need to say, and I'll do it. And I think that's all Nehemiah did. He went, okay, this is it. This is my chance. But God, I'm just going to look to you. Just for that moment, I'm going to seek you. I'm going to ask you. He doesn't react. He doesn't do that. The king could have asked him and he could have gone, wow, this, da-da-da-da-da-da, and just lifted a whole load of stuff off out of that gut response. Oh my goodness, this is the question. But Nehemiah doesn't do that. He doesn't react to the situation. He responds to the situation. And I really believe there's a big difference between reaction and response. Too often we find ourselves reacting to situations. That's almost the gut instinct. I haven't thought, I'm just doing. Like, I haven't processed, I'm just going. And you know what? I actually don't think that ends very well. Most of the time, I would say it ends badly for us to react. But we are called to respond. We are called to think through what we are going to respond with. We're told and called to actually, take that step back. And even as Nehemiah's modeling to us, pray. What a novelty and a revelation that would be for us to be faced with situations and we pray. And that's all that Nehemiah did. He prayed. He built in patterns into his life that no matter what happened, he was seeking after God. And we have to build the same patterns. The same patterns in our life, whether good or bad, we turn to God. Our absolute instant response is, God, I'm looking to you. I'm looking to you. There must be no other response before that one. And so the question is, do we seek God? How quick are we to seek God for his guidance in both good and bad circumstances? Are we quick to do that, or would we rather just react and probably later regret it? We need to work out where we are, because Nehemiah built this into his life long before he stood before the king. He had a pattern in his life that said, God, I look to you. We need to build the same. It is crucial that we respond by seeking guidance. Absolutely crucial. Because it is when we seek God and when our response is simply to look to him, it is when we allow the Spirit to work in us and through us. And it is in those moments that when we look to him and we go, okay, God, what do you want me to do? That we can be absolutely certain that God is in control. Yeah. When we choose to not look to God, how can we be certain who is leading this? Is it us and what we think is best? Or after we've seeked and we've looked to God, we can be certain that he is in control. He is doing something because we look to him. Yeah. So then Nehemiah, he prayed. And I think it was an arrow prayer. I don't think he spent hours in prayer, stood there before the king, going over and over and over. I think he just sent up a quick firing, straight up arrow prayer. God, you need to tell me what you want me to do, what you want me to say. I need your wisdom and I need your strength, and I kind of need it right now. And so he did that. And as he goes on, he answers the king, and he answers with such honesty and openness. He is so honest about his plans. He is so honest about his relationship with God and his faith. He doesn't hold back on any of those things. He just opens straight up. And when situations arise in our life, how quickly do we either open up about our faith, or how quickly are we even honest about what we're going to do? Or would we rather beat around the bush, maybe withhold a few details? Or are we just honest? Just honest about what we're going to do, what the plans, what we believe God has asked us to do? Are we honest about our faith? Do we even share with those around us the faith that we have and the relationship we have? When people ask you, or situations arise, do we talk about the impact God has on our life? Do we talk about how he has changed us? Or would we rather stay silent? Would we rather not speak out about something that we have said is the most important thing in our life? Or would we rather hold back? And I think it's because Nehemiah was honest and open about his faith. I think that's why he found favor with the king. Because he didn't lie, he didn't hold back. He just said it how it was. And because of that, he found favor in God's eyes, but also in the king's eyes. And you think up until this point, you're like, okay, you're kind of showing us up here, Nehemiah, with what you've done. But it's actually after all of that, he got really bold. He actually stepped into kind of a new level of boldness. He had asked the king to go. He had been sad in front of the king. And then he asked the king for help. And he starts to list off all of the things that he will need, the letters that he will need to keep him safe, the resources that he will need to rebuild the wall. And Nehemiah, he just got bold with the king. And often, boldness can be the difference between success and failure. Boldness can often be the difference between success and failure. If we hold back, if we don't step out of our comfort zone, if we don't step over that line, we could be withholding something. But if we do choose to step over that line, to step out of our comfort zone, we could see great success, or even it could be the making of who we're meant to be. When we just step out, when we just take that little bit of risk, step that little bit further, it can be the making of who we are. It could be the start of something that God has always intended to happen, but he needed someone to step over the line to do it. It can be all of those things, but there is often a difference between success and failure, and it is boldness. How bold are we going to be? How much do we want to step over that line? How much are we willing to risk and just go, okay, God, a little bit terrified, but you know what? If this is what you're asking me to do, against everything that you probably feel inside, because I know when I feel a little bit of fear, it's not just a pinch of fear. It terrifies me. It runs through my body. But in those moments when I step into faith and boldness, it's when the miraculous happen. Because you've stepped out of everything that you are and stepped into everything that God is. You allow the Spirit of God to overtake who you are, to fall on you, to be everything that you are created to do. And actually the Spirit steps in, and it's not you. It's not you in your strength. It's not you doing what you can. It's the Spirit of God that has fallen over you and is coming out of you. Boldness is often the outward expression of faith. And for some of us, boldness it looks so different. We talk about passion and what passion looks like in different people, and passion often looks different to different people depending on your personality type, who you are, what you like. And I think boldness is very similar, because for some people, boldness is just praying a prayer that you never thought you could pray. Even praying for someone who is ill and really needs you to pray. Sometimes that's all the boldness that you've got in you. And God knows that. God knows your heart. But for other people, boldness is bigger than that. For some, boldness is having the faith to pray. For others, boldness is building a wall like Nehemiah did. For others, boldness is building an extension on a building we've had for a really long time, but we know we've been blessed by. For others, boldness is building a community centre that we believe that God has dreamed a dream in us. Boldness is sometimes building a people like ourselves. And for others, boldness is building one single relationship. One single relationship. Boldness looks so different for so many people. But if boldness is the outworking of faith, then in order to build any of those things, we need just three things: faith, hope, and love. They are the key. We need faith to see it happen, hope in the one who makes it happen, and love, because love is the reason we do it. Love for God and love for his people. And the challenge with those three things: in which area do you need to step up? In which area do you need your faith to be lifted, or your hope reestablished, and your love increased? Because I think in every single one of us, there will be at least one, if not, I think for me, all three, that need to change. I need to have my faith lifted. Sometimes I really need my hope to be reestablished. And I know I definitely need my love to be increased. But which one of those is God poking at right now? Which one of those is God saying, now is the time. Now is the time to step into what I have for you. But I need your faith to be lifted, your hope to be reestablished, and your love to increase. And we can look to him for any of those things, because he is the one who delivers on all of them. It just takes a little bit of action for us to go to him. But ultimately, if we want to be people who build church, or just be people who are used by God, then we have to be people of faith. We have to be people of faith. Because here is the thing: fear of responsibility will dislodge you from your destiny. If you have a fear that stops you doing something, you could be derailing your very destiny. And so whatever that fear is, but if you don't do it, if Nehemiah had not gone to the king, if Nehemiah had been too scared, too fearful, it could have dislodged his entire destiny to not just rebuild the wall, but to rebuild the people. It would have derailed that completely, all because he let fear override his faith. But Nehemiah didn't choose for that to be the case. Even though he was scared and afraid, he let his fear rise up. And Nehemiah, he remained in God. His feet were so solidly planted in who God is. And that's what makes his faith rise up. It's what made his faith tip the barrel on what fear is. But church, if we do not remain in God, if we are not a people of faith, then we too could be overcome by the responsibility we have to build God's kingdom. We too could be dislodged from our destiny to build. If we do not become a people of faith, if we do not remain in God, if we do not keep turning to him, then we too will dislodge our destiny of what he has called us to do as individuals, but also as a body of people. He has called us to build. He has called us to build his kingdom as a collective, but also as individuals. But if we let fear override that, we will dislodge our destiny. We will, the things God has planned for us, they may not happen because fear has overridden your faith. Now we need faith. Faith is what keeps our eyes fixed on Jesus. Faith is what moves our attention from the situation around us to the one who is over the situation. And so actually, in what Des said this morning before I even got up, that it is all about faith, guess what? It is all about faith. It is really all about faith, and whether we want to be a people of fear or a people of faith. Nehemiah was a person of faith. He did things that I'm sure he never dreamt he would ever do. All because he had faith in the God who is over everything. And if we want to continue to build, whether that's the extension in a physical building, a community center that we still have dreams for, or whether we just want to grow the kingdom of God by adding numerically but also growing spiritually. If we want to do all of that, we have to be a people of faith. And if we're going to be a people of faith, let's keep our eyes fixed on the one who is over, the one our faith is in, the one we can be reassured that is God, the living God. It's all about faith. It's all about faith.